All right, so this is the first video. This is page 109 to 119, and mostly this is just a kind of a review. So we have second wave civilizations in world history setting us up here. It basically says what changes and what doesn't. It talks about history being sort of a camera zoom. So sometimes we look at a big picture, sometimes we look at it individually, sometimes we look at a medium zoom, whatever. Talks about this period. As we look back broadly, we see that the biggest trend was the movement of agriculture, something we've already seen, or the establishment of civilization, agricultural civilization, making slow but sure headways around the world. Now, that being said, what we need to understand is that as the agricultural civilizations are moving forward, they're not taking over the entire globe. They are, however, taking over huge chunks, and a lot of the technological advancements, a lot of the movements of cultures, a lot of that will happen in these civilizations and in these empires, which will rise and fall. They will also spread into new areas and be reborn after their falls in older areas. One thing the book does want to tell you is we see the fall in the first generation civilizations, but many of our second wave civilizations will also fall and give way to third civilizations. And I guess with the exception of maybe China or Persia, if you want to consider those continuing civilizations, all civilizations will fall and give way to new ones. Many of them in the same areas or the same geographic, proximities. The next thing we need to talk about are the continuities in civilization in the next time period. One thing he mostly talks about, which I think is funny, is what changes? He says not much. If we look at the broad scope of them, not much changes. But what we need to do is look in. He says, remember we talked about it being a camera zoom? So if we look into the civilizations, quite a bit changes. Right? And those are what we need to talk about here, is these changes. When he says not much, he says that merchants continue to go, there's monarchies everywhere, there's patriarchy everywhere, agricultural civilization continues to be the norm for large states and empires. But there are some changes in this second wave. One of them is just the growth of population. It starts to happen, as you see in this graph. The population will continue to grow. It won't be anything compared to what we see after the Industrial Revolution or the Green Revolution, but it will still continue to grow. We also see a huge growing size of civilization, and this kind of talks about how civilization change, or how humans become better at civilizations, how they create better civilizations that grow larger, more complex, and can control and influence more people. But even those societies will rise and then fall as well, as we see here with the Romans and the Mayans. These are people, these are humans that live in those civilizations that we need to look at. If we're looking at the zoomed-in lens, know that they saw these civilizations grow, they thought things were going so well, and they also saw the civilizations fall. And we have to think, what do we have in common with those people? What can they teach us? What do we know about them? The other things that we want to talk about as far as generation or generating ideas are these wisdom traditions. I guess he calls them wisdom traditions. Some people will call this the axial age. But just know that of your religions and then of your moral frameworks, they almost all come out of the second and some of them third age, but most of them out of the second age, out of Asia for the most part. That means the religions and moral codes that we'll see continue throughout civilization and continue on to the present day. There will continue, along with those philosophical or spiritual traditions, we will see technological traditions continue on in China, and then in Rome, we will see those type of things continue to happen. Now, it's nothing like the pace we've seen before, after. Before, we did see a lot of growth right around the Neolithic Revolution, and it depends on how you qualify that growth, but we still will continue to see growth happening. That's something it wants us to talk about. Technological achievements, new inventions, new ways to harness the environment, new ways to produce things better and faster, both militarily and for trading. Another thing that we're going to see is a continued improvement in communication. And this won't just be from the first era to the second era. The third era will see, again, continued communication and improvement. Fourth will see the same in the eras we're in today. There will be a continuing mixture through trade, through interaction of ideas, technologies, warfare. All of this will continue through. So there are some changes as well as these continuities. The continuities are monarchy, patriarchy, agriculture being the dominant ways. Divine kingship is still around in full swing. Empires are still around in full swing, even though they become larger and more diverse. But we'll see technologies and, of course, the philosophical and wisdom traditions. That's the end of the first wave civilizations. We're going to move on to the second wave civilizations, starting here in Chapter 3. And Chapter 3 is all, or at least the intro that we're going to talk about with the rest of this, up to page 119, is all about empires. So this whole first section is about empires, and that's what we want to focus on. We're going to talk about a lot of them: the Qin, the Han, the Persians, the Greeks, the Hellenistic empires, the Romans, the Maurans, the Guptas. We're going to see these empires face problems domestically, internationally, invasions, plagues, diseases, growth, all of these problems, and we're going to see how they struggle with those. But mostly we're talking about empires and what they do. They will all fall eventually. They sooner or later collapse, providing a useful reminder to the fleeting nature of all human creation. But during this time period, we're going to talk a lot about empires because they are some of the more important concepts during this time period. They provide the most historical data. They're doing most of the trading, most of the wars, or at least large-scale wars. They're moving religions around, and so the empires become pretty important. The last thing you want to look at for this chapter is just take a look at the timeline. Notice some of the important dates, and that's the end of that reading.